The garage smelled like old oil and cold metal, and Eli Marsh knew better than to touch the car in the far bay. Everyone at Kessler's Auto knew better. It had sat under a canvas cover for 3 weeks. The way something sits when it belongs to a man nobody wants to disappoint. Eli was 16. He touched it anyway. He didn't lift the whole cover, just enough to see a fender's curve. Silver blue under garage light, a 1967 build he recognized from a manual he'd read 4 times. He was still crouched there, fingers an inch from the metal, when the door slammed open hard enough to rattle the tool wall. "Get your hands off my father's car." What Eli found under that hood would decide whether Weston Cade ever trusted anyone again, and neither knew it yet. Weston Cade was 53, and he had not planned to be standing in a repair shop on a Tuesday morning, shouting at a teenager he'd never met. He'd planned to be in a boardroom. Instead, he was here because the car had finally been dragged out of his father's storage unit 8 months after the funeral, and some part of him needed to see it running again before he could feel anything about the man who owned it. Eli straightened slowly, hands raised, palms out. He was tall for 16, thin the way boys get when meals aren't guaranteed, wearing a shop apron 2 sizes too big with Marsh written across the pocket in marker because the shop didn't waste embroidery on foster kids doing an unpaid apprenticeship. His foster placement had arranged it 6 months at Kessler's. Sweeping floors? Learning enough to maybe get hired somewhere real someday? "I wasn't going to touch anything," Eli said. "I was looking at the brake line." "You don't know what you're looking at." Weston's voice had the flat certainty of a man used to being right. "This car is worth more than everything in this building combined, and it's the last thing that connects me to my father. So I'd appreciate it if the boy sweeping floors kept his hands off it." Eli's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd learned, across 4 placements in 3 years, that saying nothing was survivable in a way arguing usually wasn't. He turned to leave, then stopped, because leaving without saying it felt worse than staying and saying it wrong. "Your rear brake line's cracked near the axle mount," Eli said, not turning around. "Probably from sitting so long without moving. If somebody drives it before that's fixed, the pedal will feel fine right up until it isn't." Weston stared at him. "Excuse me, if you believe skill has no age limit and grace wears no last name, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today." Eli had been fascinated by engines since he was 9, in a placement that lasted 4 months. With a foster father who ran a 2-bay garage out of his backyard and let Eli hand him wrenches on Saturdays before that placement ended the way most did, abruptly, with a caseworker and a black trash bag of belongings. But something stuck. In every home after that, Eli found the same thing. A library book on internal combustion, a torn manual left in a donation box, a video watched on a cracked phone screen in a room that wasn't really his. He learned brake systems the way some kids learn instruments obsessively. Alone, because it was the one thing that made sense when everything else kept changing. Kessler's had taken him on because the county paid a stipend for at-risk apprenticeships, and because old man Kessler didn't ask questions about a 16-year-old showing up with a duffel bag instead of a backpack. Eli had spent 6 months sweeping, fetching, watching, occasionally handing someone a torque wrench. He was good. Everyone at the shop knew it. Nobody had told Weston Cade, because nobody expected Weston Cade's world to intersect with the boy who swept the floors. Weston crossed the garage in 4 strides and crouched by the rear. Wheeled, the way a man crouches when he doesn't actually know what he's looking for, but needs to look like he does. "Show me." Eli knelt beside him and traced a thin hairline split in the rubber and steel brake line near the mounting bracket. "Right there. See how it's swollen just above the crack? That's fluid pressure finding the weak spot." 3 mechanics looked at this car this week, and none caught it because they were checking the pads, not the lines. "The pads are fine. This isn't." Weston went very still. He had, in fact, paid 3 mechanics to inspect the car in the last 5 days, each certifying it road ready. He'd planned to drive it himself this weekend, alone, down the coast road his father used to take him on as a boy. The last drive he'd never gotten to take before the stroke that ended everything 8 months ago. The unsaid sat heavier than anything spoken. The drive Weston hadn't told anyone he was planning. The last conversation with his father that never got finished. "You're telling me," Weston said slowly, "that if I had taken this car out this weekend, the brakes could have failed going downhill?" "Probably would have." Eli said it plainly, without drama, the way he'd learned to say hard things. Flat, factual, because softening bad news had never once made it less true. Weston sat back on his heels. For a long moment he didn't say anything at all. Then, quietly, in a voice that had lost all its earlier certainty, "How does a 16-year-old know that and 3 grown mechanics don't?" "Because I actually looked." It wasn't meant as an insult. It landed like one anyway, and also like something else. Truth arriving from an unexpected direction, the way truth sometimes does. Weston stood, walked to the workbench, and picked up a photograph sitting there since the car arrived. His father, younger, grinning beside this same silver-blue frame decades earlier. Grease on his hands, pride on his face. He looked at it a long moment, then at Eli. "My father restored this car himself. Every bolt. He taught me the names of parts before he taught me anything else." His voice caught, just slightly, untaught. I never learned it the way he wanted. I was always somewhere else. Meetings, deals. I told myself there'd be time. Every act of understanding starts somewhere. Neither expected his father's hands on a wrench 40 years ago, and a boy's hands on a manual with no one to hand him the tools but himself. Eli didn't know what to say to that, so he said the only true thing he had. He'd probably be glad somebody caught it before it hurt you. Something moved across Weston's face. Grief, or the first loosening of a grip he'd held since the funeral. He set the photograph down. What's your name? Eli Marsh. Fix it, Weston said. Properly. Whatever it needs. I'll pay for the parts, and I'll pay you for the work. Real pay. Not whatever the apprenticeship gives you. Eli hesitated. I'm not licensed. I'm not even old enough. I don't care what you are on paper. I care what you just showed me under that car. Weston's voice had none of the sharpness from 20 minutes earlier. Kessler can supervise if insurance requires it, but you're doing the work. Old man Kessler, watching from the office doorway the whole time, didn't argue. He'd known what Eli could do for months. He'd just never had anyone in the building willing to bet on it out loud. Eli spent the next 11 days on that car, replacing the brake line, then going deeper, a worn hose the paid mechanics missed, a fuel line showing early wear. Weston came in most afternoons, not to check the work, but to watch. He started asking questions. Eli started answering the way his backyard foster father once had, patient, unhurried, handing over one small piece of understanding at a time. On the 12th day, Weston drove the car for the first time since his father's funeral, down the coast road, alone, as planned. He didn't tell Eli where he was going. When he came back 3 hours later, his eyes were red, and he didn't explain that either. He didn't have to. What passed between a father who was gone and a son who finally understood him arrived through a stranger's hands under a car neither expected to matter this much. What Weston did next wasn't a headline gesture. He didn't buy Eli a house or write a check for a good photograph. He called a trade school 2 towns over, one with a real automotive program and a placement rate that mattered, and guaranteed Eli's tuition and a stipend so he wouldn't need 3 jobs. Around his coursework the way most kids aging out of foster care did. He asked Kessler to keep Eli on part-time, and because the gesture that mattered most turned out to be the smallest one, Weston gave him his father's old socket set, the one from the photograph, the one his father had used to teach parts he never fully learned. He'd want someone to actually use these, Weston said. Eli didn't say much back. He just held the case a little tighter than he needed to, the way people hold something they've decided not to lose. 2 years later, Eli finished his automotive certification with the highest marks in his cohort, working weekends at Kessler's, driving carefully, deliberately, the way he did everything. A silver-blue 1967 Weston had signed over to him the day he turned 18. Weston still called sometimes, not about the car, just to talk. Neither called it what it had become. Somewhere in a garage that still smells like old oil and cold metal, a boy nobody expected to matter fixed a brake line, and fixed something in a grown man that had been broken far longer. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of courage and grace. And tell us, has anyone ever seen something in you before you saw it in yourself?